Hello, everyone again. We are officially starting the Global Families International Education Week webinar. Carol, if you can go to the next slide. I want to let people know why AFS is promoting, engaging, offering these webinars. So if you've come to this webinar through another venue and you don't know very much about AFS, I want to tell you a little bit about us in some numbers. So AFS has 59 national organizations all around the world. We are doing student mobility, digital exchanges. We are working in the field of international education with one mission: to develop active global citizens. And we are an education, not-for-profit organization. We involve volunteers, we involve families, we involve schools. And of course, this is why we have an interest in this topic and an interest in the field and want to contribute to the betterment of this field and want to bring people together, bring this community together. So I think for the fourth year now, we have offered a webinar series that is open, it's free, it's accessible, as a moment that we can come and reflect, engage some of our colleagues from other fields and other areas, and provide, most of all, a professional development opportunity for those of us who are around the world. So thank you so much for joining. I'm already looking forward to what we can come up with next year. And if you have suggestions for topics, let us know. If this is the first session you're joining, it is the last of a series that started on Monday. We've had all these different topics that you see on the screen. So if you missed any of them, but would like to watch the recording will be available on our website, on the landing page. You'll be able to access it. We have been uploading the recordings immediately after each session. So you'll be able to go back at any time. You can recommend to a colleague if you really like and say, watch this, I loved it. I think you'll get something out of it too. So thank you again, and this is the last one that we are closing our week with. I think we can move on, Carol, because I'd really like now to start introducing our panelists. So maybe I'll start introducing myself since I've been talking to you already. My name is Andresa Martins. I work at AFS as the Deputy Chief for Programs, and I work for AFS International, which is the headquarters that coordinates our large network. I am based in Brazil. At this very moment, I am in Argentina. And my primary role is looking at the quality and the operations of our high school mobility programs. I would like to introduce you to Ana Carolina Cassiano, who is a dear colleague. She's the head of educational development at AFS International. Her work centers around nurturing global citizenship education, and she's involved in development, assessment, implementation of all our education initiatives, in particular of our education curriculum. She has worked in New York, in Norway, in Argentina, and she's also based in south of Brazil in Florianopolis. The next panelist that I'd like to introduce is Dr. Vishaka Desai. Dr. Vishaka is a former senior advisor to the president of Columbia University and advisor in global affairs, also a former senior research scholar at the university, at the Social International Public Affairs School. And she has served as the CEO and president of the Asian Society, and very close to us, has served as the chair of AFS International. So very nice. She has published, the last book I believe she has published is called The World as Family. And we're very happy to have Dr. Desai here, Vishaka as we call her, to help us reflect on this topic. And then I'd like to introduce Dr. Mansa Sustarkis. She's coming to us from the Center of Disability Studies at the College of Education at the University of Hawaii. And her topic of research is also connected to development of youth and adults in the community. And more specifically, she has looked at educational initiatives around global education and has done research specifically with students participating in mobility and families participating in mobility. And she's going to bring to us some of her scholarly research on this topic. So thank you so much to each one of you. It's really an honor to have you here. So let's get to it. Why did AFS conduct a global host family survey? Well, as I said, our mission is to develop active global citizens. And most of the time, when we talk about families in the context of mobility programs, we talked about them as a component of a student's program, almost like the type of accommodation they will have. They will be staying with the host family. But because we reach such a large number of host families, and for AFS, our longest and largest program model is totally based on host families, it is definitely an audience that we had a great opportunity to impact directly, not just through the student, but impact these families and develop their global competencies. So we wanted to ask the families what they were feeling about the benefits of the experience that they had. So this survey was really to hear directly from them about the benefits that they perceive for themselves in terms of global competence development. And I'm going to turn to Carol now to explain a little bit more the details of this research that we conducted.
Thank you,
Carol.
Andresa. And I believe it was about maybe 2 years ago, end of 2022, that Andresa turned to me with this challenge. So she shared, what if next year we conduct a research, a survey to try to understand better what are the effects of hosting? What does the effect it has on host families, as she shared? And part of my role, as she shared, is looking at the impact and assessing the learning of our programs. And this is an audience we haven't looked at before. And doing some literature review in our field of international education, this is a topic that hasn't been much researched, even though there is a lot of research on the impact on the students, the learners that go through mobility programs, either high school level or higher education level. There's very little on the families that host them. And in AFS, because our programs are majoritarily family-based, these are families that voluntarily host our students, they are key participants in our programs as well. And our education curricula is also framed to them with learning goals and learning objectives to what we would like families to learn. But we have never assessed it before. So with that challenge, we decided 2023 to conduct this survey. And our research questions were, what did we want to understand? First, how did hosting impacted these former AFS host families? What motivated these families to become hosts? And also, what were the key personal learning outcomes of a hosting experience to the family? So these were the questions we had behind this survey. And just a little on the methodology and data set. So our tool was an online survey for which the responses were collected last year between April and December 2023. This was a very long survey. We piloted, we reduced it, but really it was a lot of questions that we wanted to ask. And we had that from early on, sharing with families that this would take 10 to 15 minutes for them to answer. And it had 34 questions, 30 of them being close-ended with multiple choices, and 4 open-ended questions. And these questions, they covered all sorts of details. For example, demographic details, the family's perspectives about their experiences as host families, information about their continued connection to the host students after the experience. And also we wanted to understand how they continued engaged either with AFS or with intercultural learning overall. Other than English, the survey was available in 12 other languages, for example, German, French, Japanese, and Spanish. These translations were made possible with the support of AFS national offices across our global network. And the way we distributed the survey was mainly through mailing lists of our contacts of these former host families, but also through social media, right? We wanted to reach families across different parts of the world that would be interested in responding to this question. And what we learned as we were doing, there's been, as I said, limited research, mostly qualitative or either focused on in-depth case studies. And most of the studies are limited generally to a country or any specific region. And this, of course, it was a more large-scale survey, right? And we did collect over 3,000 responses, which it was plenty. So 3,266 to be precise, pretty robust response rate. And this came across 76 different countries. Predominantly, and you see that on the country distribution chart there, they came from the top 5 countries that these families came from were Germany, the US, Japan, France, and Argentina. But then under 10% we had across several countries, different continents. And even so, we could understand some trends with these answers we had that were across various countries, were common trends. For example, the frequency of hosting. Half of the respondents reported that they hosted one time. And what called mostly our attention was this idea that families repeated the experience, right? For many, this is a once in a lifetime, but if you look, 30% responded that they hosted between 2 and 3 times. And that was great learning for us. And most surprisingly, I would say 4 to 5 times, also quite significant, 11%. And what surprised me the most is that there are families that hosted more than 10 times. So this was very interesting for us to gather and see these responses. And then I also wanted to share with you some of the key takeaways from the answers, which were some of the key findings and learnings that we learned through these responses. One aspect was 2 things were very much highlighted by the families that, of course, we know anecdotally, and we knew this was a hypothesis, but the survey really reinforced this notion that this idea of transformation, that this is a transformative experience. They highlighted this idea that a meaningful cultural exchange truly happens when hosting someone for an extended period of time. And most importantly, there were these new family bonds built. It's quite interesting on the open-ended responses, we can see some words repeating, right? Oh, we had an extended family member. We added a new son or a new daughter to our family, a new brother, a new sister. So this idea that really a hosted student, a hosted participant becomes another family member, that this is truly very deep and meaningful experience showed up in the responses. The second finding, which was also a hypothesis we had, because we hear this anecdotally from families that have hosted, is the learning that happens with the siblings, generally with similar age of the hosted student, teenagers, but oftentimes also younger. And what we learned about the type of learning that happened that families reported, they were very much social emotional aspects. For example, they reported improvement in the communication skills of the children in the family, and also more confidence and more flexibility. So this was very interesting as well to learn. Thirdly, we also wanted to understand how families frame these global competencies, as Andresa mentioned, and also the personal growth that happens, if this is just for the siblings or across the family members. And what families reported is that this actually impacted the family as a whole, that hosting someone from a different culture for an extended period of time really honed their open-mindedness, flexibility, perspective taking, and some other aspects that are crucial in what we call global citizenship. And finally, crossing the data, we also learned that families that had a continued engagement with AFS, this maximized the benefits for them. So families that continued engaged with AFS through volunteering, the repeated hosts, or families that continue somehow linked to intercultural learning opportunities, they showed reported more growth or more learning outcomes. And for us, this was also confirming this idea that honing intercultural global competence is not a one-time thing, right? It's the sense of either being through AFS, as we ask here, or through other experiences. It's the sense that intercultural and global competence are like a muscle, right? You ignite curiosity, you ignite this, and by continuing exposed to difference, continue engaging with people from different cultures, this really enhances and maximizes the learning. This is what I wanted to share in these few minutes, and we can continue in the discussion. And then just to finalize, I'll pop the link on the chat for those who want to learn more. Our report is available for download. There's an executive summary with key takeaways, and you can also read through the report. And
Carol, thank you so
Andresa,
much.
I'll stop my screen sharing just so you know.
There is a question in the chat that is interesting, Rodolfo, so thank you for the question. He's asking, based on our research experience, and maybe Mansa, you can pick up on this too, have you encountered diverse ethnographic conceptualization of what hosting experience entails? So, what would a hosting experience be for us to define it in this format and look at it through this lens? So that's a really interesting question. Mansa, maybe you can start, setting the ground of what you considered in your research a hosting experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rodolfo. This is a great question, and it's a very dynamic process, really, that hosts describe what hosting means to them or their families. What I've observed through my research is that it evolves over time with long-term hosts, seeing hosting on a much deeper level, seeing the impact it brings to their extended host family members, right? Not only their immediate members, but truly to their grandparents or grandchildren, whatever the case may be. And then also the host community more broadly, which I will touch upon shortly. And for first year hosts, oftentimes they come in with a bit more idealistic perception of what hosting means. Sometimes it starts treating student as a special guest, but then as time goes on, they realize that this is a true member of the family, and it comes with both responsibilities and rewards. That's just my short answer. Thank you.
Looks like we lost Andresa, but Mansa, I'll ask you to continue. The floor is yours if you want to share a little bit with us, and we can continue the discussion after.
Can you see my screen? Yep. Okay. Thank you so much. First, let me express my gratitude to the AFS for having me here today to be able to share part of my dissertation research, in fact, that I conducted in Hawaii over a period of 3 years. And I will be focusing and highlighting the voices of the host families today. Okay. So, first, in my introduction, youth exchanges have been an important part of the international education landscape in the US since World War II. And the US government has invested in these programs as a public diplomacy tool to support its foreign policy objectives. In my study, I explored 2 government-funded exchange programs, Future Leaders Exchange, or FLEX, and the Kennedy Lugar Youth Exchange and Study, or YES. Briefly, FLEX was established in 1993 to promote diplomacy with former Soviet Union countries, and YES in 2002 in response to the 9/11 events to maintain good diplomatic ties with predominantly Muslim nations. This high school youth live with a volunteer host family, attend public high school, and share their culture with their host, as well as learn about American culture in exchange. And the purpose of my study was really to offer a more nuanced understanding of the dynamics that shape exchange programs and different exchange participants. And I think today this research is still very much timely and relevant, as we have observed a counterforce of deglobalization characterized by national protectionist policies. Let me now introduce my 2 research questions for the purposes of this presentation. So the first one was, how do participants experience each aspect of the program and its processes, and to what extent do these experiences reflect program objectives? And the second one, how do participants experience intercultural exchange within a homestay, and what kind of interactions characterize their experiences? Now, let me briefly introduce my methodology that informed my study. I did a qualitative case study due to the collective context of Flex and Yes being administered in the same way by the same local coordinators here in Hawaii. I did interviews, observations, and document reviews for a period of 3 years, so going through 3 different cohorts of exchange programs in Hawaii. And then as my timeline, these are different events, including required orientations, enhancement activities, as well as other opportunities where I chaperoned and volunteered with exchange students and host families. And towards the end of the program in April, I conducted all my interviews with exchange students, host families, and local coordinators. So my sample included 44 participants total, of which 23 were students, 19 were host families, and 2 local coordinators. Those are located on 2 different islands. And then I established credibility through triangulation and member checking. I just want to present a visual map of where the students came from. So we had students from Eastern and Southeastern Europe, from Central Asia, from Middle East, Africa, South and Southeast Asia, and they all were placed in Hawaii with the volunteer host family for an academic year. And here, I'm just again presenting a visual to characterize exchange students that I included in my study. So there was quite an equal distribution between the 2 programs, 15 female and 11 male students. As for the island placement, more than half of the students were placed on Oahu in mostly urban areas, compared to other neighbor islands that are more rural or country communities. And the average age at the time of my interviewing was 16.5 years old. And for the host families, and this is now really the focus of my presentation today, is first looking at the host family type. Very interesting, 7 families were single host, 6 families were nuclear families with children, 4 were multi-generational with grandparents or grandchildren living within the same household, and 2 were empty nesters. For their occupation, 13 hosts were working professionals and 6 were retirees. And also in the context of Hawaii, it's very interesting to observe the upbringing of these families, with nearly 80% of them, in fact, not growing up in Hawaii, but moving there as adults for work, mainly military, for studying or so on. And then only 21% were actually the ones from Hawaii. Another here characterization of the years of hosting. It's also quite interesting. Half of the hosts were first time hosting, and then 5 host families, in fact, hosted for over 20 years. Quite impressive. And now I will jump into my findings to take advantage of our time together. And first, let me focus on the program experiences. The first theme here were host family motivations to host. And mainly, it was a continuation of cultural values instilled in them during their own upbringing, as demonstrated in this quote here, highlighted in yellow, such as families who hosted international students in the past or had a sort of international experience or exposure through their own travel, work, or volunteerism. And these families perceived hosting as an opportunity to pay it forward. Some other families were motivated by personal or family goals, such as exposing their children to different cultures. However, the profile of most hosts here, with many now being empty nesters and retirees, show how these programs still rely heavily on older generations who see the value of international exchange. Another theme that emerged is this issue related to host family recruitment, profile, and retention. So the government still insists on the host voluntary role to avoid any ulterior motives. But these ideals are rooted in the post-war goodwill and hospitality values. That being said, local coordinators noted how younger generations and families see less value in partaking in public diplomacy compared to, let's say, the Peace Corps generation. Additionally, barriers such as time, space, and financial constraints prevent younger families from hosting. And this generational social changes altogether may be the main reasons for recruitment challenges on the ground, for perhaps some lack of diversity among host families, and even multiple host family changes throughout the year. The third theme that emerged is the role of cultural ambassadors. So both students and host families are to represent their home culture, right? With host families embodying American values. While many hosts embrace this role with enthusiasm, excited to introduce students to American traditions and ideals of democracy, however, this role does not come with its complications and nuances. Hawaii is truly one of the most ethnically diverse states, and the hosts were predominantly white and from middle or upper middle class socioeconomic backgrounds and who were not native to Hawaii. And these families, for their own accounts, made intentional, explicit efforts to distinguish between what is a typical American family and culture versus what is a typical Hawaiian culture, as demonstrated in this quote. However, there were examples in minority with Asian American hosts providing students with unique cultural exposure, such as Chinese traditions, Filipino food and media, and lifestyles blending the native and American cultures. And so while these families contributed to a more diverse representation of American society and expanding students' worldviews, challenging preconceived notions of what an American family looks like, there is a sort of critique that still we need more diversity among our host family community. And finally, in this section, I'm touching upon the community service requirement that is required by the program for students to complete a minimum of 30 hours during the year. And one of the aims is really to interact and, as part of this ripple effect, to affect different groups of people in host community. Notably, many students volunteered with their host. This family saw the value of volunteering in their own lives and got to expose their students to host community members through different activities. Additionally, hosts often celebrated students' achievements, taking part in extracurricular or community activities and events, and basically saying how these accomplishments made them and the entire host community proud, leaving a lasting impression on them. Moving on to the second part of my findings related to intercultural exchange experiences. First, these findings show how a homestay demonstrates that culture sharing expands beyond simple artifacts into deeper conversations about politics, religion, and race. Hosts appreciated learning about students' cultures, often expanding their worldviews and those of their children. And despite programs' discouragement of direct or regular contact with students' natural families, many hosts, in fact, found value in communicating with students' natural parents and even grandparents. These interactions foster a deeper connection and understanding of the student's cultural and family background. The second big theme that emerged here is relationship building. And fostering a sense of belonging to a family. Hosting often brought positive changes to internal family dynamics, promoting thoughtful conversations, better behavior of host children, and closer family interactions. Families also reported being more proactive in spending quality time together. In some cases, hosting brought families closer during difficult times. There was a case of a grieving father and daughter who found connection through hosting an exchange student. Another interesting case here in the context of Hawaiian multicultural households and multi-generational households is the opportunities for relationship buildings among different generations, as I said, grandparents, grandchildren, and other family members who may reside in the family. And then for the third theme here, this relates to navigating teenage behavior and household dynamics. Interesting enough, host families attributed most homestay challenges to kind of universal typical teenage behavior, what they call it, rather than cultural differences. And so hosts and students had to learn how to manage shared responsibilities and boundaries while maintaining patience and kind of working through the trouble. And so while some families, those who never parented before without their own children, experience some sort of fatigue, adjustment fatigue to this role and the new role in their lives. Students, on the other hand, gained more maturity, responsibility, and self-sufficiency. And then finally, really the final theme here, I would say the overarching theme is a family is a family. So both exchange students and families navigated the process of getting integrated into this new family dynamics and lifestyle involving both challenges and rewards. Most of them developed strong bonds through shared activities and interest and consistent efforts. Nothing comes easy. And so while students initially struggled with the concept of being treated as a family member rather than a special guest, over time, they came to appreciate the value of being involved in family chores and routines. And by mid-year, I've observed them call their host families mom and dad, and vice versa. Families call them as daughter and son. And both parties expressed desire to maintain long-lasting bonds. And this was truly pronounced between students and host parents, and a little bit less between students and host siblings. Okay, so for the limitations of my study, I just wanted to highlight a few things. First, participants were deliberately selected using purposeful sampling through my contacts as a former assistant to the local coordinator in Hawaii. I had, so to say, easy access, but I got to volunteer with the organization throughout the year to really build trust and rapport with both students and families. And then second, all participants were self-selected and participated voluntarily. All my interviews were conducted at the end of the exchange year. However, I complemented this data with observations and document reviews. And of course, there is still a lack of more in-depth perspectives of other host nationals that are not only of host families. And in conclusion, I just offer a few recommendations here for moving forward. A more balanced two-way exchange that mirrors in the government rhetoric and program goals would demonstrate the U.S. global and not only national commitment to promoting mutual understanding and peace among nations, encouraging host families and communities to actively learn from students' cultures as much as students learn about American culture. Second, the exchange programs could embrace multiculturalism in all its forms to recognize the uniqueness of participants' identities and experiences. Program activities could be designed to celebrate diversity, to provide students and hosts with tools to better understand and navigate multicultural interactions or any frictions, fostering deeper mutual respect. And third, the orientations could serve as the main support mechanisms for students and hosts who are struggling, who may not fit in, or who may not have parented before. The programs could also integrate training on the issues that make the historic basis of these exchanges, such as peace building, mediation, conflict resolution, that could serve both youth and hosts well in their culturally and religiously diverse societies. And then finally, the programs could give community service a clearer purpose by forming strong partnerships with local organizations to engage students and families in skill building around local community issues with global implications. And this is all I have, just ending with a quote that I found very powerful by a long-term host family. I think it is important for Americans to experience foreigners because we have a tendency being surrounded by ocean on both sides, and sometimes the mentality that we are first or that we're the biggest and the most powerful. That is something that has to go along with human beings, all of us. So again, emphasizing the humanity. Um, Thank you so much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mantha. This is I'm at once very energized, very hopeful to hear the outcomes of your research from the point of view of the learnings that individuals have on both sides, from the point of view of the benefits there are perceived for one's own family and their own interactions. On the other side, I am somewhat concerned because you also raised the issue that this is lagging a little bit in time. You see the more of that predisposition, more of that interest, more of that recognition of benefits are in the older families. Many of it continue to host even when they don't have any children in the home. And so you also mentioned that the younger families are less likely to see these benefits. You identified some very concrete barriers like time, space, money, right? And how, if this is such a key contribution to society, if there are such significant benefits, where are we lacking in interesting younger families in also taking advantage of this kind of programming for their own family dynamics, development, growth? I feel that there's a little bit of disconnect there. And I'm curious if this is societal in the sense you said, we are moving to a less globalized society to some extent. Maybe this is a good moment. I'll hear from you, but I'll also start transitioning to Vishaka, because Vishaka, you're someone deeply engaged in global education and policy, and then you write a book, and of course, many, but you wrote a book about the world as family. So how do you reconcile these two realms, right? The realm of the family, which is a unit, to the realm of the society and the global. And I'm really, like I said, excited and concerned that we may be looking into missing an opportunity here with the younger families.
Thank you. I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to jump right in. Let me just say, first of all, what a pleasure it is to be here, not just as a former chair of the AFS International. So congratulations to all of you for actually focusing on the family, because so many times you're always focused on the student who is impacted and what happens to their future. So to actually open up the lens, I think is a very desirable goal. So congratulations. And the second thing I want to say is that I also speak as a former AFS student who was a student in a host family, although many, many moons ago, many years ago, but it still is something that's very, very vivid to me. And it was a very seminal experience for me, and I know also for the family that I was with. So I will just say that we've seen lots of statistics, data, analytics. I'm going to do neither. I'm simply going to really talk from a personal and a reflective point of view that actually might make us think about some of the issues that Andresa, you have just raised recently. So I want to start with, in fact, my memoir, World as Family, why that title, what that was, and how my experience was seminal in my definition of how I think about my life and my world. And that phrase, world as family or Vasudeva Kutumbakam, is a Sanskrit phrase that goes back to 1000 BCE. So this was something that was thought about long time ago to connect the idea of a modality of a family with the world. Not only that, but the full phrase was very clear, where the philosopher who wrote this, we don't even know who, because it was so long ago, where he says that it's only those of a limited mind who think of the blood relatives as their own. But those of a capacious mind know to treat the world as family. So where we're thinking about host family is really the first step in thinking about opening your lens to look at people who are not your blood relatives, with whom you have a familial connection. So the word family becomes very important. What do we mean by a familial experience? And what we think about family, at least I would say in functional families, because there are lots of dysfunctional families out there as well, is that in the functional family, if you're lucky, you learn about you as an individual, but you also learn about being part of a unit that is more than just you. And thirdly, you learn that it's both about responsibility to another, and it's about the reward that comes from being in that community. And that's something that you actually, Mansa, were talking about in one of your last points. And I think that why it's important is to recognize that the host family experience is actually one of those early familial experiences through the homestay, by being in a family, that you learn about treating others as if they're part of your family. And once you do that, as actually one of our younger AFS students had said to me when we were in Ghana, and then he said is, I really learned that once you open your eyes, you can't close it again. And the point about that familial experience is that once you know how to do that with people who were strangers to you at one time, it allows you to think about how it's possible to do it with others. And therefore, the impact is not just for the immediate blood family or the relatives, but it's even the relatives who are kind of put together. But it is about recognizing that all of this is possible. It opens up the dimension of thinking that there are other parts of the world, people far away, who can actually become your family. And we know this from firsthand that during COVID happened, how many of the host parents actually said, we don't want our son or daughter, meaning their exchange student, to go back because it was not safe for them at that moment to travel, because there was that much of a bond. Some of you have written in the chat that, I did my program 18 years ago, and my American family or whatever the family treats me as their son or their daughter. And I know that actually this was true again when we were traveling in different parts of the world, when in fact one of the colleagues said to me that it was literally 58 years ago that he had gone to Minnesota in a small village, and a small town rather, and the father of the family had died, and they kept the body until the son from Ghana could come and be there. So these connections have very deep, deep roots, but they're all done without any immediate kind of familial connection. So the other thing I think we need to think about is that therefore, those of you who are not in a host exchange program, let's say, and that's where the question comes up, Andresa, what you were talking about, is that how do we create that sense of familiarity in a situation that may not be in a traditional family, that may not be a one-year program, but are there other ways that we can create the facility in which people have experiences with people from different parts of the culture, multi-generational, even if it is not whole year, maybe it's not 6 months, but how do you do something that's continuous over time? And so I, for example, was thinking, because I teach now at Columbia and I teach a course on global thought programs, I have 36 students from 25 different countries. And there is a bunch of these students who don't have a place to go anywhere. And this used to happen in universities a lot, that they would have host families that would host the foreign students in their homes. But if you can do that continuously over a period of time, we have to think about other models. It may not be it's, in other words, define the family in a different way. Define the familial quality that you can engage with, even if it is not a traditional family. And that opens up other possibilities for us to think about, because what's our goal? Our goal is for people to have deep understanding of people who are different from you, who might have different cultural experience, who might have different kind of backgrounds. And that can happen in multiple dimensions. And how do we create that possibility of a continuous engagement that actually is crucial about people who may seem other to us, then they become part of us. So how do we change that definition of us and them to us?
Yeah.
And that
Yes.
usness comes through. How do we define that usness? Is through the familial, long-term engagement with a group of people, or even if it's not very long, but some consistent engagement, and that we develop that. So we have to move away from family as in traditional definition of family. What are the other ways that we can actually engage in this? And that has responsibility for higher education at a different level, when you have lots of students, especially in our age, when actually, on the one hand, there is interest in traveling and studying abroad. On the other hand, there's a huge amount of resistance in having people come in, especially in a place like America. So we have to think about deeply about how do we actually create the cultural differences that become the connection of humanity, and where is that going to come from? And it will be not, it sounds Pollyannish, it sounds kumbaya-ish, but the truth is the challenges we face today about separateness, about smaller tribal culture are huge, exactly when the world is getting more and more interconnected through communication, through travel. The truth is that today, more people in the world live in a place that is not their home than there are people who are citizens of America. So you're talking about more than 380 million people in the world who are living someplace that's not their home. So the movement of people, movement of ideas, movement of communication really means that we are living cheek by jowl with people who are not like us. And yet we don't have enough skill sets. So the goal has to be about the intercultural learning, about familial frame in which that intercultural learning happens. So open it up a little bit and then see
Yeah.
what we can do, which is not to deny or denigrate the experience of the host family, exchange student. All of that is pretty good. But you know what? It may not be the only model how you can make a difference. So I
Thank
will
you so
stop
much,
there.
Vitaka. No, thank you so much for these reflections. And it goes back to what Rodolfo was asking in the beginning, like, what is the hosting experience in quotes, right? What is that definition? And this is what you're coming back to, in the sense that if this is so beneficial for all involved, how can we lower the barrier? How we can diversify the models, especially for people that don't have, as Manka said, this historic connection, the generation where this started and people felt really connected to this idea of bringing the world together post-war and so forth. How do we make this more available and lower the barriers for people who are there now, young families and people living in a world that is not necessarily inviting them to do this to some extent, right? But we know in our practice in international education that there is a huge potential and very concrete benefits from creating opportunities for these familiar experiences. And I am invited to think that all of us there are working in communities with students, and that by definition of community, that will be families. How can we think of creating opportunities in our communities, in our planning, in our calendars, to create these snapshots of familiar experiences that begin to give people the initial benefits, whether they decide to do longer engagements or not, this is secondary, but is giving opportunities for these capsules of familiar experiences that can be the beginning of this journey, as kind of the continued engagement, right? The people have appetite for more and for more diverse. So this is really, a really, for us, I think in our field, a challenge for us. on how we make this more accessible. I really liked, Manka, your very concrete recommendations in terms of not only small, but people need more preparation. Perhaps they need more support to listening more frequently to people who have these experiences, because they'll tell us what would make it easier for me to do more of what I like to do, right? So both new audiences in different models, and lowering the barrier and increasing the support for those who already see the value. And I also think that, and I'm thinking about your book, we have to tell these stories too, right? I think that if we're the only ones sharing what this benefit is, maybe we don't spark the curiosity of our people. So we do need to also to share out in both academic ways and storytelling, in giving voice to those people themselves that can tell, like you brought quotes for us, so that we can, in the communities, be in the local papers, in the school assemblies, in the communities, people need to hear about this, right? It is not just in social media when we post something. People need to hear this in that familiar environment so they believe in and are attracted to it.
Well, I do think that we need to remember that the social media landscape, while it has brought the whole world in our palm, in our cell phone, it has also fragmented us because sometimes it's too much to handle. And that therefore one barrier is that sometimes in many parts of the world, especially in the developed world or the Euro-American world rather, I don't want to use the word that isn't correct, but that people are going narrow and narrower into their own little community, especially young kids. So we have to work harder to actually say, why is it exciting to actually be with people who are different from you? Because that is not where so many countries are at the moment. And how do we, so there's a kind of a strange byproduct of social media. And that is making people want to connect to ever smaller, their little unit, and not beyond that. So our challenge is pretty great, actually.
We also had a comment talking about, thank you. It's specifically saying how AFS has thoughtfully included the non-traditional family and diversify the concept. So that is another aspect of it, that this definition of family is really broad, and we have an AFS made that effort in every society to reflect the actual made up of the families in the society, right? So we need to reflect that, and every family in that society is a family that AFS can have. So I really want to thank you so much for these reflections. I want to challenge ourselves. If this was inspirational, I can always think of a colleague that said, if it inspired you to do what? So to think about lowering these barriers, AFS also works very much now with the virtual opportunities for intercultural learning. And we haven't perhaps been able to yet involve families. We have involved schools and we have involved students, but perhaps that, and think about how to give voice to people to talk about their learnings and their experiences. Let me check here one more time in our Q&A to see if there are any more questions coming, and also give an opportunity to all of you to have a closing reflection. Mansa, Carol, if you want to have a closing reflection, as we're coming up to time.
I can start just, I had muted myself, I know we are on time, but just for me, it's very interesting first hearing Mansa's key takeaways from her research and how much there was in common with our survey, right? In terms of the motivations, in terms of also the impact and benefits, cultural exchange, this idea of really bringing an extended family member. And to Vishaka's point, also in the motivations, it's interesting, right? Are we reaching just audiences that are already a bit open-minded, right? Because what they are saying is that one of the motivations is that they have curiosity about other cultures. So how do we reach these other families that can really benefit from the impact of hosting and breaking this barrier of us versus them by experiencing firsthand the connection with someone who is different from them, So for me, it was a very interesting reflection and food for thought for us, right? We learned, which for me is a big first step, learned a bit about our former host families, what they think, but now it's like thinking forward, who do we want to reach and make sure that they are benefiting from these impacts of becoming a host family.
Thank you, Carol. And I'll go over to Thomas. I just want to say too, we were focusing a lot on the global survey of AFS, and Monk's study is on the US sponsored, but there are several other countries that have large sponsor programs as well, like Germany with the Congress Bundesstaat, and also AFS Japan with the Kakahashi. There are other governments who see this as a venue for public policy and soft diplomacy to some extent is important. Mansa, would you like to share some final reflections?
Yes, I guess building on what Vishaka has emphasized today about the family and the family unit, the non-traditional families and so on, I think this was one of my findings as well, right there, right? You could see how family can come in all shapes and sizes, and that is okay. And perhaps one of the things that local coordinators encounter here in the field is exactly that people don't feel like they can provide a meaningful experience to an exchange student simply because they're so self-aware of whatever their situation is does not fit into this definition of a family as perhaps most people perceive it, right, as universal definition of two parents with two children. So I guess one recommendation would be, as we talk about it, to really emphasize the diversity of families and how each type of the family can bring a very meaningful experience to their exchange students. One thing I didn't have time to touch upon, but these relationships can look very different, but they're also meaningful, right? In a nuclear family, it's more typical parent-child relationship, but when you have a single host of all different generations, it may resemble more of a friendship relationship. And this has its own advantages too, with students gaining more independence, being more self-sufficient, having perhaps more attention within this family unit, meeting more of their friends, and so on. So just kind of showing this diversity and highlighting the voices of host families, I think would be impactful in general. But again, are we preaching to the choir, right? Are we preaching to those who are already internationally minded? And then how do we find others who may truly benefit, but they just do not see it as of now, or they may not recognize the long-term value of hosting.
It
Well,
may
thank you so
require
much.
baby steps,
Yeah.
because there are people who don't even know what they don't know. They need to experience something that would then open up their mind. So it may require some very small steps of getting to know somebody who is from somewhere else, and what would that look like. So it's worth thinking about what the steps are before you can actually go towards building a familial relationship. So just something to think about.
Well, I thank you very much. I think the data and the information is the inspiration, is the why, and the reflection is the challenge, right? For us to find more ways to create familial experiences that are so valuable and so necessary for us world as family. Vishaka, thank you for that. I want to remind everyone who attended, you will receive a badge from us that celebrates your participation. We invite you to, again, access the landing page where we have all the recordings of the sessions that took place this week. And I just want to, again, thank you so much, our panelists today, for coming to this reflection. I want to ask you to help us improve and share your feedback. Here we have a link and our QR code that you can use to fill out a survey to let us know what you felt about this webinar, what you want to hear more from and more about. So we are very grateful for your presence and very much interested in your feedback. And with this, we close the final session of 2024 AFS International Education Week Seminar Series. And let's hope we have something to come back and continue to have this team in the future. As you said,